Hey everyone, welcome back to Harp and Guitar, People and Music, and welcome back to another episode once again here at Whiskey's Blues Gumbo, the show where we take weird or strange sounding blues words or phrases and we try to figure out what the heck they talking about. And today I wanted to talk about the term or the word hokum and where that comes from. And basically, what hokum is or was, it was actually a subgenre of the blues. Hokum is a strain or an offshoot of the blues that came out of sort of the medicine shows and the traveling tent shows and vaudeville that was going on in sort of the late 19 teens, early 1920s, right up through until roughly the late 1930s, or even creeping up on the pre-war of World War II sort of area around 1941, 42-ish. And basically, what hokum was sort of bawdy songs. They were racy or raunchy blues songs, and they were still in the pretty much in the traditional blues structure. But the content was much more overt or in your face than what blues normally would. And we often talk about double entendre or double meaning or sexualization of different topics, different subject matter in blues anyway. I mean, it was pretty much, a running thread through all the blues. But more often than not, hokum was much more overt, much more in your face about it. Foul language and lots of way more obvious double entendre. So you'd get songs like I Want Some Sugar in My Bowl, or Let Me Put My Banana in Your Fruit Basket, and different things like that. And it was quite a popular subgenre or offshoot of the blues for about 20 years or so. Like I said, it really kind of got going in the 1920s and was helped by the medicine shows and by vaudeville and that sort of thing. But it slowly started to peter off once recordings of these shellac platters, these 78 records, became more and more mass produced and more widely available to the public. Uh, you didn't need electricity where you lived to be able to play one of these old things. All you needed was one of those old Victrolas or old phonographs where you could just crank it, put the record on, and it would turn and you could play a record. So more and more people were buying these phonographs or these Victrolas. The more they were being made, the more affordable they were, and the more homes had them, and therefore the more records people could buy, the more of these 78s that people could buy. And as a result, the popularity of records and genres like the blues and jazz and swing and all of that became more and more accessible as well. Now, what a lot of the record companies started doing was they realized that they could really cash in on this sort of thing. So they started categorizing a lot of the music. Prior to that, there wasn't really a lot of categorization of music. A lot of people just bought whatever they bought and bought whatever they felt like listening to. But once they realized that certain groups of people were really latching on to certain styles of music, they started dividing these things up and categorizing them within their catalogs at their companies. So you got things like race records that were, for the most part, marketed towards the African American community, and more often than not, like 95% of the 98% of the time, were African American performers that were being recorded on these records. And then it was being marketed to and sold to African Americans in furniture stores that were in African American communities in small towns or in some of the city areas. And that's where you would buy not only phonograph or Victrola record players, but the records themselves were in furniture stores because the furniture manufacturing companies were the ones that were making these phonograph players or these Victrola players. So once this started to happen and things became more and more standardized, and once things got to be sort of categorized as jazz and blues and Western swing or country and Western or uh, whatever the case may be, there was a problem with having sexually explicit content on records that the buying public could easily have access to, and a lot of times had foul language in it. They would swear and use curse words. So they slowly started to kind of phase out the hokum recordings that were sort of categorized within their blues series or their race records series that they were selling every month. Now, there was a slight resurgence during the wartime period, and that was sort of, after the Great Depression, as you got into, after the sort of the dirty 30s and after the Great Depression, and once you got sort of ramped up into the pre-war period and through World War II, when things started to become prosperous and more people were getting back to work and the economy was recovering, there was a slight resurgence in the hokum style of playing, but it was never really a term that was sort of brought back or sort of what's the term I'm looking for? It wasn't reused again. People weren't often referring to that music anymore as hokum music. It was just referred to as blues, and it was just sort of lumped in with all kinds of blues music, whether it was sort of country blues, like acoustic stuff, or what we are now seeing as more of the electric blues that was also starting to be recorded. It was all kind of mashed in the same sort of category of the blues. But there were quite a few artists that continued recording hokum style songs through this entire period, from the 30s and the 40s and into the even in the 50s. And one example of that is Dinah Washington. And Dinah Washington is known as sort of more of the classic blues singer style. She didn't play any instruments. She just sang the blues with a sort of a jazzy sort of tinge to her vocal style. And she would play small blues clubs in the big cities, but she was also known to play these big sort of concert halls as well, these more sophisticated types of venues. And this is sort of known as the classic blues period that started, really it started with Ma Rainey and Bessie Smith in the late 20s, but it continued through until just before the World War II era. And Dinah Washington's career, actually, she continued recording right through the 50s and I believe into the early 1960s. And Dinah Washington was one of those few artists that was able to straddle both. She still recorded some body songs or songs that were hokum-esque, that had some of these sort of double entendre or more racy or more raunchy types of lyrics or subject matter. But she also recorded more the classic blues and the more jazzy sort of popular stuff that was targeted towards a wider audience. But some of Dinah Washington's recordings were songs that again were in that hokum sort of frame, right, and used a lot of sexually charged language and very much that double entendre. One song in particular that I can think of is called Long John Blues, where she sings about going to the dentist because she's got an ache, and he says, "Oh, I see that you have a cavity that just needs filling." So again, this sort of slightly more under the cover, slightly more subverted, but still very much a little bit more obvious in terms of the raciness of the verbiage or the language. Now, there are a few exceptions, of course, as you got into the 50s and 60s. Guys like Robert Petway, for example, did record some songs that I would consider hokum songs, but again, they weren't categorized or called hokum. They were just categorized as blues songs. Another one's Texas Alexander, another one's Speckled Red. And a lot of these guys did their recordings through the 40s and 50s, and they kind of came back up again as the sort of in this blues revival or this blues rediscovery or resurgence that happened amongst the college crowd in the 1960s. People were rediscovering the blues of decades prior, and a lot of these old artists kind of came back up out of the woodwork again and started performing these old tunes again, and even in some cases re-recording them. And often they were sort of referred to as the dozens or the dirty dozens because it had a rhyme and it was sort of a playful tongue-in-cheek way of insulting or using body talk or strong language or sort of racy content as well. But the term hokum never really kind of came back into favor. Once World War II was over, a lot of artists still continued to record that style of music, but it was never really referred to as hokum again after that. But the best examples of hokum that you would find are definitely in the late 20s and early 1930s. So there you go. That is going to do it here for today at Harp and Guitar and another episode of Whiskey's Blues Gumbo. So as always, thank you very much for coming by, and let me know what you think down in the comments, and drop us a line, of course, as always, if you come across anything weird or strange in the blues and you don't know what they mean or what they're talking about. Happy to look into it, and more than happy to do a video about it as well. So in the meantime, thanks once again. Take care of yourselves out there, and we'll talk to you again real soon. All right? Take care. Bye-bye.